Close your eyes. Go on, close them, just for a second. And listen. What do you hear? You probably hear something. Maybe it is the hum of the room. Maybe a car outside. Maybe a little ringing somewhere. Fine. But I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine we could take all of that away. Every sound, every vibration, every whisper of air moving past your ear. Suppose we could put you in a room so perfectly quiet that nothing, and I mean nothing, reaches your eardrums from the outside world. What would you hear then? Nothing, right? That is the obvious answer. Take away all the sound, and you get silence. Zero. The absence of everything. Like turning off a light and getting darkness. But that is not what happens. Not even close. And what does happen is, I think, one of the strangest things I have come across in all of physics. Let me start with the room, because people have actually built this room. It is called an anechoic chamber. Anechoic is just a fancy way of saying no echoes. And the walls are lined with these long, wedge-shaped pieces of foam or fiberglass, and they stick out in every direction, like the inside of some enormous egg carton designed by a madman. The whole thing is mounted on springs inside a concrete box, and that concrete box is inside another building. The point is to kill every reflection, absorb every sound wave, and block every vibration from the outside world. Now, the quietest of these rooms, the ones the engineers are really proud of, get down to about -20 decibels. And I should explain what that means, because most people think 0 decibels is silence. It is not. 0 decibels is just the threshold of human hearing. It is the quietest sound a healthy young ear can detect. So when I say -20 decibels, I am talking about a room that is quieter than your ears can register. On paper, that room is silent. As far as your biology is concerned, there is nothing there. So what do people experience when they walk in and someone closes that heavy padded door behind them? They hear their own heartbeat. Loud, thumping, like someone put a microphone inside their chest. They hear their lungs pulling in air and pushing it out. They hear their stomach gurgling and churning. Some people say they hear a rushing sound, a sort of low roar that they eventually figure out is blood flowing through the vessels near their ears. One fellow described it as sounding like the rumble of a subway train, except the subway train was him. And then it gets worse. Within about 15 minutes, many people start to hear a high-pitched ringing, a whine, a tone that was not there before, or at least they never noticed it before. Within half an hour, some people feel dizzy, because it turns out a big part of how you keep your balance is by using the little reflected sounds bouncing off walls and floors. You do not think about it, but your brain is constantly using those echoes to figure out where you are in space. Take them away, and suddenly standing upright becomes a project. Some visitors report seeing lights that are not there. Little flashes, little sparkles in the darkness. Their brain, starved of input, starts inventing things. One visitor described the sensation as feeling like the walls were closing in, even though the room had not changed. Another said the silence felt thick, like it had weight, like it was pressing against the sides of their skull. And here is a detail I love. When you talk in an anechoic chamber, your own voice sounds wrong. Flat, dead, because normally when you speak, part of what you hear is the sound bouncing off the walls and floor and ceiling back to your ears. You are used to hearing yourself with reverb. Take that away and your voice sounds like it is coming from inside a pillow. People say it feels like their words are being swallowed the moment they leave their mouth. The longest most people can comfortably stay in one of these chambers is somewhere around 45 minutes to an hour. Some brave souls have pushed past that, but they describe it as one of the most disorienting experiences of their lives. Not dangerous, nobody is going to go mad, but deeply, deeply unsettling. It is the kind of discomfort that does not come from pain or fear. Exactly. It comes from wrongness. Your brain knows something is off. It just cannot figure out what. And you know what I think the most telling detail is? The balance problem. When you walk into one of these rooms, you start to wobble. You feel like you might tip over. And the reason is that your sense of balance is not just in your inner ear. It partly relies on echoes. Reflected sounds from walls and floors give your brain spatial information. How far am I from that wall? Am I tilting? Am I moving? Take the echoes away, and a whole layer of spatial data just vanishes. Some facilities tell visitors to sit down in a chair before they close the door, because after about 30 minutes, standing up becomes genuinely difficult. You lose your footing in silence. That is a remarkable thing. Sound holds you upright, and you never even know it until it is gone. So here is our first puzzle. We built the quietest room on earth. We removed every external sound we could possibly remove. And the result was not peace. It was not calm. It was not nothingness. The result was that a person became excruciatingly aware of sounds coming from inside their own body. That is already strange, but it is only the first layer, because if you dig a little deeper, you find that the body's sounds, the heartbeat and the blood flow, those are not really the interesting part. The interesting part is the ringing, that high-pitched tone. Where does it come from? Most people, if they have heard of it at all, know it as tinnitus. Tinnitus affects millions of people. Some hear it all the time. Some hear it only in quiet environments. For a long time, doctors figured it was just damage. Your ears get old, some of the little hair cells in the cochlea get worn out, and the damaged circuitry starts generating phantom noise, like a frayed wire sparking in the dark. And that is true for some cases. Damaged ears do produce tinnitus. But here is the thing that made me sit up. Healthy people hear it too. Put a young person with perfect hearing in a perfectly quiet room, and sooner or later they start hearing a tone. Their ears are not damaged, their cochlea is fine, their hair cells are intact. So what is making the noise? All right, let me take you inside the ear, because something extraordinary is happening in there and most people have no idea. Your cochlea is a tiny spiral structure about the size of a pea, curled up like a snail shell in the bone behind your ear. Inside it are these rows of hair cells. When sound waves come in, they set up a traveling wave along a membrane, and the hair cells ride that wave. They bend, and when they bend, they send electrical signals down the auditory nerve to the brain. That is hearing, in the simplest version. But the outer hair cells, the ones in the outer rows, they do not just receive sound, they amplify it. They are tiny biological amplifiers. When a faint sound wave comes in, these cells actually change their shape. They contract and expand. They physically move, and when they move, they push back on the membrane and boost the signal. Your ear does not just passively collect sound like a microphone. It actively amplifies it like a microphone, with a built-in speaker that turns itself up. And here is where it gets wild. A physicist named Thomas Gold predicted this in 1948. He was an astrophysicist, actually, not an ear doctor. He looked at the mathematics of the cochlea and said this system cannot possibly be as sensitive as it is unless there is some active amplification process going on. The numbers do not add up. The damping from the fluid in the cochlea is too strong. If the system were purely passive, it would be far too sluggish to detect the faintest sounds humans can hear. Something must be pumping energy in. He published his theory, and almost everybody ignored him. The auditory physiologists of the day thought he was crazy. The cochlea is passive, they said. It just receives vibrations. What does an astrophysicist know about ears? And so Gold's paper sat on the shelf for 3 decades, waiting for the technology to catch up to the idea. 30 years later, in 1978, a man named David Kemp stuck a very sensitive microphone in someone's ear canal and recorded something that should not have been there. Sound coming out of the ear, not going in, coming out. The cochlea was emitting a sound of its own. Gold had been right all along. The ear was not a passive receiver. It was an active device, an amplifier. And like all amplifiers, it made noise as a side effect of its operation. These are called otoacoustic emissions. And they are real and they are measurable, and they happen in about 60% of healthy human ears all the time without any external stimulus at all. Your ear is not just a listener, your ear is a speaker. It hums to itself, constantly, without your permission. So already, we are in trouble with the idea of silence. Because even if you seal someone inside the quietest room in the world, their ears are generating faint sounds on their own. The instrument you use to listen is not quiet. The microphone has a hum, and you cannot turn it off because the hum is a byproduct of the amplification system that makes your hearing so sensitive in the first place. But we are not done. We have not even gotten to the brain yet. And the brain is where this story becomes truly strange. Let us follow the signal down the auditory nerve. When a hair cell bends and fires, it sends a spike, an electrical pulse down the nerve fiber toward the brainstem. Simple enough. Sound goes in, spike goes out. But what happens when no sound goes in? The nerve still fires. This was discovered back in the 1960s when researchers first put electrodes on individual auditory nerve fibers in cats. They put the animal in a quiet room, removed all sound, and watched the neural activity. They expected silence, they got chatter. The nerve fibers were firing, spontaneously, at rates ranging from a few spikes per second up to over 100 spikes per second. No sound, no stimulus, just a steady stream of electrical pulses heading up toward the brain, carrying a message that says essentially something is happening, even though nothing is happening. And it was not just one or two fibers misbehaving. Every auditory nerve fiber they tested showed spontaneous activity. Each fiber had its own characteristic rate, some very fast, some slow, but none of them were silent. The whole auditory nerve, all 30,000 or so fibers in each ear, chattering away in the absence of any input whatsoever, like a telephone switchboard, where every line is buzzing even though nobody has made a call. Later studies found that this was not just a quirk of cats. Rats, guinea pigs, gerbils, every mammal tested showed the same thing. And when researchers estimated the spontaneous rates in human auditory nerve fibers, they found roughly the same picture. About 20 to 25 spikes per second on average. That means right now, as you sit there, each of the nerve fibers coming out of your cochlea is popping off about 20 electrical pulses every second just because it exists. That is not hearing. That is your nervous system's idle state, like an engine at idle rumbling in the driveway even though nobody is pressing the accelerator. Why would the auditory nerve fire when there is nothing to hear? One reason is thermodynamics, and this is the part where my ears really perk up because now we are talking about physics. Inside the cochlea, at the junction between the hair cell and the nerve fiber, there is a synapse. That synapse uses chemical neurotransmitters to pass the signal along. Little vesicles of a chemical called glutamate are waiting inside the hair cell, and when a sound wave bends the hair cell, calcium floods in, and those vesicles release their cargo. The glutamate crosses the tiny gap and triggers the nerve fiber to fire. That is the signal pathway. But here is the problem with chemistry at small scales. Molecules jiggle, they wander, they bump into things. At the temperature of a living body, roughly 37 degrees, every molecule in that synapse is vibrating, bouncing, doing a little thermal dance. The calcium ions are rattling around, the vesicles are drifting, and every once in a while, completely at random, a vesicle fuses with the membrane and dumps its glutamate, even though no sound caused it. Nobody asked it to, it was just thermal noise. The random motion of molecules at body temperature triggering a release event by pure chance. Think about it like a bowl of marbles sitting on the edge of a table. In a perfectly still world, none of them roll off. But if the table is vibrating even a little, eventually one of them jiggles its way to the edge and falls. The warmer the table, the more vibration, the more marbles fall. Your synapses are the table, the neurotransmitter vesicles are the marbles. And the temperature of your body is the vibration that keeps knocking them off. You cannot stop it, not while you are alive. So the auditory nerve is not a quiet wire waiting patiently for a signal. It is a noisy wire that crackles all the time because the molecules inside it cannot sit still. And you cannot cool the molecules down because you are alive, and alive means warm, and warm means motion. This is where it starts to get deep, because what I have just told you means that perfect silence is not just hard to achieve in an engineering sense where you need thick walls and foam wedges. It is impossible in a physical sense. The very atoms in your ear are moving. The fluid in your cochlea is sloshing, slightly, from thermal agitation. The membranes are trembling. Everything is vibrating, very faintly, because everything above absolute zero vibrates. And absolute zero is minus 273.15 degrees. You are not at absolute zero. You are at 37 degrees. So there is motion. There is always motion. And some of that motion is going to tickle a hair cell and produce a signal. You hear that, probably not consciously, but your auditory nerve hears it. It sends signals about it, and your brain receives those signals every second of every day. So let me ask the question again. What is silence? It is not the absence of external sound, because we have already shown that the ear makes its own sound. It is not the absence of nerve signals, because the nerve fires on its own. And it is not the absence of molecular motion, because that would require cooling you to absolute zero, at which point you are dead, and the question is moot. Then what is it? Here is what I think is really going on, and this is the layer that I find most fascinating of all. Your brain is not a passive receiver. Your brain does not sit there like a radio, waiting for signals to come in and then reacting to them. Your brain is a prediction machine. It is constantly, furiously generating expectations about what it is going to hear next. Every fraction of a second, before any signal even arrives from the ear, your brain has already made a guess. It has built a little model of the sound environment and predicted what the next instant should sound like. When the actual signal comes in and matches the prediction, your brain says, "Good, nothing interesting happening, carry on." You do not notice. The sound fades into the background. This is why you stop hearing the hum of a refrigerator after a few minutes. Your brain predicted it, the signal matched, and so it stopped calling your attention to it. But when the prediction is wrong, when the signal does not match what was expected, that is when you notice. That is when neurons light up. That is when you turn your head. Surprise is louder than sound. You can test this on yourself. Think of a song you know very well, something you have heard hundreds of times. Now imagine someone playing that song for you, and right in the middle of the chorus, they mute it, just cut the audio dead. What happens in your head? You keep hearing the song, not out loud, but in your mind the melody continues. Your brain had already predicted the next notes, and when the signal vanished, the prediction kept running. You hear the ghost of the music in the gap. This is not imagination in the usual sense. This is your auditory cortex generating the expected pattern and sending it forward as if it were real. Researchers have seen this in brain scans. They play people familiar songs with gaps of silence in them. And during those gaps, the auditory cortex lights up in patterns that match the missing music. The brain plays the song for you, even when the speakers are off. There was a composer back in 1952 who understood this better than anyone. His name was John Cage, and he wrote a piece of music called 433. I am sure some of you have heard of it. The performer walks out onto the stage, sits down at the piano, opens the lid and plays nothing for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Just sits there. The audience coughs, shifts in their seats, whispers, and that, Cage said, is the music. The sounds the audience makes while waiting for music. The sounds that were always there but were invisible because everyone was paying attention to something else. Now, I am a physicist, not a music critic, so I do not know if Cage had physics in mind when he composed that piece. But I will tell you what I think he stumbled onto. He stumbled onto the fact that silence is not a passive backdrop. Silence is what the ear and the brain produce when you strip away the expected signal and let the noise floor come through. The audience heard themselves. They heard the ventilation system and the creaking of chairs and each other's breathing. And they heard it more acutely than usual because their brains were predicting piano music and getting nothing, and the gain went up, and suddenly every tiny ambient sound was amplified by the violation of expectation. That is exactly what happens in the anechoic chamber. The same mechanism, the same physics. The brain expects a world full of sound. It gets a world stripped bare. The mismatch cranks the sensitivity knob, and the noise floor rises to meet you. Now think about what happens in total silence. You are in the anechoic chamber. Your brain has been building predictions all day based on the soundscape of your life. It expects hum, it expects rustle, it expects the little ambient wash of noise that accompanies every waking moment. And suddenly nothing. The prediction does not match. The brain was expecting X and got 0. That mismatch is an event. It generates neural activity. Your auditory cortex does not go quiet. It goes loud in its own way, firing off error signals and trying to figure out what went wrong with its model. Researchers have actually measured this. When they put people in a scanner and measured brain activity during periods of silence, they found that the auditory cortex was not idle. In some cases, it was more active than during quiet listening. There were bursts of spontaneous activity, particularly in the left hemisphere, in areas associated with speech processing. The brain, confronted with nothing, was talking to itself. And it gets stranger still. In experiments where you play someone a steady rhythm, tick, 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 and then you suddenly omit one beat, just skip it, leave a gap of silence where a tick should have been, the brain responds to the silence as if it were a sound. The neurons that normally fire for the tick still fire. At the exact moment the missing tick should have arrived, the auditory cortex produces what researchers call an omission response. It is neural activity generated not by what happened but by what did not happen. Your brain heard the silence, and it treated the silence as an event. In some cases, the response to the missing beat was even stronger than the response to the beats that were actually there. Let that sink in for a moment. The absence of sound is processed as a presence. Silence is not nothing to your brain. Silence is a very specific something. It is the ghost of the sound that should have been there but was not. This is why the anechoic chamber is so disturbing. It is not just that you hear your heartbeat and your blood. It is that your brain has lost its prediction target. The ambient noise it was effortlessly filtering is gone, and there is nothing to replace it. The prediction engine keeps running, but every prediction misses, and every miss produces a little jolt of surprise. The error signals pile up. The brain turns up its gain, desperately trying to find the signal in the noise. And when the gain goes high enough, you start hearing things that come from inside the system itself. The hiss of random neural firing, the hum of otoacoustic emissions, the faint crackle of thermal noise in your synapses. You do not become aware of these things because they suddenly got louder. They were always there. You become aware of them because your brain, in a panic of unfulfilled predictions, cranked the volume knob all the way up. The noise floor did not rise, the threshold dropped. And this is a beautiful piece of engineering, by the way, if you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint. An animal that can dynamically adjust its hearing sensitivity based on the ambient environment is a very well-adapted animal. In a noisy jungle, you turn down the gain so the constant din does not overwhelm you. In a quiet clearing, where a snapped twig might mean a predator, you turn it up. The system recalibrates constantly. It is elegant. And it is not just the brain doing this. The ear itself adjusts. Those outer hair cells I mentioned earlier, the ones that amplify sound, they are under control of a feedback loop from the brain. There is a bundle of nerve fibers called the olivocochlear bundle that runs from the brainstem back down to the cochlea, and it can tell the outer hair cells to dial it back. If the environment is loud, the brain sends a signal saying calm down, reduce the gain. If the environment is quiet, the feedback relaxes and the hair cells amplify more aggressively. The whole system, from ear to brain and back to ear again, is a closed loop that continuously tunes itself to the ambient noise level. You have experienced this without knowing it. Walk out of a loud concert and get into your car, and the music on the radio sounds incredibly quiet even though you have not touched the volume knob. That is because your gain was cranked down to survive the concert and has not recovered yet. Wait 20 minutes and the radio sounds normal again. Your system recalibrated. But the side effect is that when the environment goes to absolute zero noise, the system recalibrates so aggressively that it starts hearing itself. The noise floor did not rise, the threshold dropped, the detector became so sensitive that it became its own signal. It is the same thing that happens when you turn up the volume on a microphone with nothing to record. Past a certain point, you hear the hiss of the electronics, the hum of the power supply, the buzz of the circuit board. The microphone is hearing itself. Your ear in a perfectly silent room is hearing itself. I find this metaphor irresistible, so let me push it a little further. Imagine you have a very sensitive radio receiver, the kind they use for listening to signals from deep space. You point it at a patch of sky with no stars, no galaxies, nothing. Just empty void. What do you hear? Static. Hiss, because the receiver itself generates thermal noise in its circuits. The electrons in the wires are jiggling, and those jiggles get amplified and come out the speaker as a faint, steady roar. Radio astronomers call it the noise floor, and it is the fundamental limit on what you can detect. No matter how good your receiver is, you cannot listen below the noise of your own instrument. Your ear is exactly the same. It has a noise floor. And the noise floor is set by physics, by the thermal motion of molecules at body temperature, by the random firing of neurons, by the faint hum of the cochlear amplifier doing its job. You cannot get below it. You can make the room as quiet as you want. You can build walls 10 feet thick. You can float the whole thing on air springs. It does not matter. The noise is inside you. It was there before you walked into the room, and it will be there after you leave. You just never noticed because the world was loud enough to drown it out. So here is the picture I want you to hold in your mind. Silence is not the absence of sound. Silence is what happens when external sounds stop and internal sounds become perceptible. It is not emptiness. It is the unmasking of a noise that was always running. Your auditory system never ever shuts off. It cannot. Shutting off would mean reaching thermodynamic equilibrium with absolute zero, and that is not compatible with being alive. But I want to take one more step, because there is a layer below thermal noise that I find almost haunting. Think about what a sound wave actually is. It is a pressure wave. Regions of slightly compressed air followed by regions of slightly expanded air, traveling outward from a source. For you to hear something, those pressure changes have to push on your eardrum with enough force to move it. The quietest sounds you can detect move your eardrum by a distance smaller than the diameter of a hydrogen atom. I want you to think about that. The threshold of hearing involves a displacement smaller than a single atom. Your ear is operating right at the edge of what is physically meaningful. And at that scale, you are brushing up against a different kind of limit entirely. At the scale of atoms, the world is not smooth. The air molecules hitting your eardrum do not arrive in a nice steady stream. They arrive in random bursts. Some moments, a few more molecules hit from the left. Some moments, a few more hit from the right. This is just statistical noise, the random fluctuation of a gas made of individual particles, and it has a name. It is called Brownian motion. It was described mathematically in one of Einstein's great papers from 1905. At ordinary sound levels, these fluctuations do not matter. The signal is so much bigger than the statistical noise that it dominates. But when the signal gets very, very small, approaching the threshold of hearing, the Brownian motion of air molecules starts to become comparable to the signal itself. Your eardrum is being jostled by random molecular impacts at roughly the same scale as the faintest sounds you can hear. This means your ear is operating at nearly the physical limit of sensitivity. It cannot get much better without running into the fundamental granularity of matter. If your hearing were about 10 times more sensitive, you would hear the random thermal motion of air molecules as a constant hiss. You would hear the Brownian motion of the air. Nature tuned your ear to sit just above this floor, sensitive enough to catch the faintest rustle of a leaf, but not so sensitive that the random jittering of molecules would drive you mad. Let me give you a sense of how remarkable this tuning is. The energy of the faintest audible sound, the one that just barely moves your eardrum by that fraction of an atomic diameter, is about 10 to the minus 16 watts per square centimeter. That is not much. For comparison, a whisper is about 10 to the minus 10 watts per square centimeter, 1,000,000 times more. A conversation is about 10 to the minus 6. A rock concert is maybe 1 watt per square centimeter. So the range of your hearing, from the faintest whisper to the threshold of pain, covers a factor of about 1 trillion in power, 12 orders of magnitude. That is why we use decibels, which are a logarithmic scale, because the linear scale would be useless. Your ear handles a dynamic range that most laboratory instruments would struggle to match. And at the bottom of that range, right at the threshold, you are hearing vibrations that carry about the same energy as the thermal motion of a single air molecule at room temperature. Not quite the same, but the same ballpark. The signal and the noise are on the same playing field. And that is exactly where you want to be if you are an animal trying to hear a predator sneaking through dry grass at 50 paces. There is a wonderful calculation you can do. If you take the average kinetic energy of an air molecule at room temperature, which is about 1/2 times Boltzmann's constant times the temperature, that works out to roughly 4 times 10 to the minus 21 joules, and the energy delivered to the eardrum by a sound at the threshold of hearing over one cycle of vibration is in the same neighborhood. The numbers are not identical, but they are close enough to make a physicist's eyebrows go up. Your ear evolved to operate at the thermal noise limit of the medium it listens to. That is not an accident. That is evolution pressing right up against the constraints of thermodynamics and saying, I cannot go any further. I find this astonishing. I really do. Because it means that silence, true physical silence, silence at the molecular level, does not exist anywhere in the universe where there is matter above absolute zero. The air in this room, right now, even if no one were speaking, is full of pressure fluctuations at the molecular scale. Every surface is vibrating. Every molecule is bouncing. And some very tiny fraction of that activity is brushing against the threshold of what an ideal ear could detect. We are bathed in a sea of thermal whispers, always, everywhere, and we hear none of it, only because our ears were calibrated, over millions of years, to sit just barely above that floor. So let me put the whole picture together. You ask me what silence is, and I say it is at least 5 different things happening at once, none of which are actually silence. Think of it as layers of an onion, and every time you peel one back, there is another source of noise underneath. Peel back the room, seal the walls, kill the echoes, block the world. The external noise is gone, but now you hear the body, your heart, your blood, your lungs, your gut. You are a warm-blooded machine with moving parts, and moving parts are never quiet. Peel back the body. Imagine you could somehow silence every organ, every muscle, every fluid flow. The ear itself is still humming. Those outer hair cells are tiny engines that never idle, and the sound they emit leaks back into the canal whether you want it to or not. Peel back the ear's own output. Suppose you could mute even that. The nerve is still chattering. Vesicles are still tumbling across synapses at random, pushed by the jostling of warm molecules. The wire crackles even when the microphone is off. Peel back the nerve, the brain is still lit up, generating prediction errors, firing omission responses, filling the void with its own anticipated soundtrack. The command center refuses to believe the phones have stopped ringing. And beneath all of that, at the very bottom, the air itself trembles with Brownian motion, and the atoms in every surface vibrate with thermal energy, and quantum mechanics insists on a zero-point tremor that nothing can erase. There is no layer where you reach zero. There is no bottom to the onion. Every time you think you have gotten to silence, you find another hum. So when you walk into that anechoic chamber, you are not experiencing nothing. You are experiencing everything you normally ignore. You are hearing the full output of a system that never stops, a system that was designed by evolution to operate in a noisy world and has no off switch, no mute button, and no concept of zero. You pulled back the curtain, and there was not darkness behind it. There was a machine running, humming, crackling, and predicting, and it had been doing that your whole life. The quiet room is not quiet. The quiet room is the place where you finally hear what was underneath the noise all along, and what was underneath the noise was you. Now you might say, all right, Feynman, this is all very interesting, very poetic even, but what does it have to do with physics? And I would tell you it has everything to do with physics, because the question of silence is really a question about noise floors and signal detection and the limits set by thermodynamics, and those are physics questions, right down to their bones. Every measuring instrument, every detector, every sensor you will ever build has this same problem. There is always a noise floor. There is always some level below which you cannot detect a signal, because the instrument itself is producing fluctuations that look like signals. In electrical circuits, it is Johnson noise, the thermal agitation of electrons in a resistor. John Bertrand Johnson measured it at Bell Labs back in 1926, and Harry Nyquist explained the theory the same year. The noise power is proportional to the temperature of the resistor times the bandwidth you are measuring. You cool the resistor down, the noise drops, but it never reaches zero unless you reach absolute zero, which you cannot do. In radio telescopes, the noise floor is set by several things. There is the thermal noise of the receiver electronics. There is interference from the atmosphere. And there is the cosmic microwave background itself, that faint glow of radiation left over from the early universe, filling all of space at a temperature of about 2.7 degrees above absolute zero. When Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson stumbled onto that signal in 1964, they thought it was noise. They thought their antenna had pigeon droppings on it. They cleaned the antenna, and the signal was still there. They could not get rid of it because it was not instrument noise. It was the noise of the universe, the leftover hum from the beginning of time. They found it by trying to make their detector quieter, and discovering there was a sound coming from everywhere at once that could not be removed. I love that story, because it is the exact same story as the anechoic chamber, played out on a cosmic scale. Build the quietest detector you can, remove every source of noise you can identify, and what you find at the bottom is not silence. You find a signal that was always there, hidden under the noise, waiting for you to get quiet enough to hear it. Penzias and Wilson heard the birth of the universe. The person in the anechoic chamber hears their own blood and nerves and atoms. The lesson is the same. In gravitational wave detectors, it is seismic vibration and photon shot noise, and at the very bottom, the quantum uncertainty in the position of the mirrors themselves. And in every case, the story is the same. You build the best detector you can, you shield it, you cool it, you isolate it, and eventually you hit a floor that is set not by your engineering but by physics itself, by the temperature of the detector, by the granularity of matter, by the uncertainty principle. There is always a hiss, there is always a whisper. You can reduce it, but you cannot eliminate it, not without violating the laws of thermodynamics. Your ear is the most exquisitely evolved sound detector on the planet. Millions of years of natural selection built this device, and it got within about a factor of 10 of the absolute physical limit set by Brownian motion. That is extraordinary. That is better than most of our best laboratory instruments do relative to their own noise floors. Your ear is a masterpiece, and the price of that masterpiece is that you can never ever hear silence, because the detector is too good, the amplifier runs too hot, the prediction engine is too ambitious. The system was built for a world where there is always signal, and it refuses to believe there could be no signal. It keeps looking, it keeps listening, it keeps generating activity in response to nothing, because in the world where this system evolved, nothing was never really nothing. Nothing was the moment before a predator pounced. Nothing was the gap between one danger and the next. And so the brain learned to treat silence not as peace but as a warning. I keep coming back to this because it tickles something in me that I think is important. We have this instinct, a very deep one, that says the natural state of things is stillness. That motion has to be explained, but rest does not. That noise is a departure from silence. And physics says it is exactly the other way around. Motion is the natural state. Thermal agitation is the default. Every atom and every object at every temperature above absolute zero is shaking, vibrating, bouncing, and the energy of that motion is proportional to the temperature. Stillness, true stillness, is the thing that requires explanation. Stillness is the thing that would violate the laws of thermodynamics. The universe is not quiet by default. The universe is noisy by default, and silence is the illusion. Go further. Go to the quantum level. Even at absolute zero, where classical physics says everything should stop, quantum mechanics says no, there is still motion. The zero-point energy, the residual vibration that persists because the uncertainty principle will not allow a particle to have both a definite position and zero momentum. You cannot pin a particle down and also stop it moving. Heisenberg will not permit it. The mathematics is clear. A quantum harmonic oscillator in its ground state still has 1/2 h bar omega of energy, 1/2 not zero. The floor of all vibration is not a flat, silent nothing. It is a faint, irreducible tremor built into the equations at the deepest level we know. Even at the bottom of everything, even at the coldest possible state, there is a tremor. Nature does not permit absolute rest. The very fabric of the physical world has a noise floor, and it is built into the mathematics of quantum mechanics at the most fundamental level. You could cool the universe to as close to absolute zero as the laws allow, and there would still be fluctuations. There would still be jittering. The vacuum of empty space itself is not empty. It seethes with virtual particles popping in and out of existence, and those fluctuations have measurable effects. The Casimir force, the Lamb shift, spontaneous emission from atoms. All of these are consequences of the fact that the ground floor of nature is not quiet. So what is silence? Silence is our name for the noise we have gotten so used to that we stop noticing. Silence is the brain's polite fiction that the world has an off switch. There is no off switch, there is only the volume knob, and the knob goes very low, but it never reaches zero. Not in this universe, not at any temperature where life can exist. Not in any detector that runs on physics as we know it. And I think this is one of those lessons that starts with the ear and ends up being about everything. Whenever you think you have found a zero, look closer. Whenever someone tells you a quantity vanishes, a field reaches null, a system goes completely quiet, be suspicious. Because nature has this habit, it fills in the zeros. There is always a residual, a remainder, a faint hum. Sometimes the hum is thermal, sometimes it is quantum. Sometimes it is the ghost of a prediction your brain cannot stop making. But it is there. It is always there. We thought empty space was empty. Then we found the vacuum energy. We thought a cooled atom was still. Then we found zero-point motion. We thought a quiet room was quiet. Then we found that the ear hums, the nerve chatters, and the brain dreams up sounds to fill the gap. Every time physics encounters a zero, the zero turns out to be an approximation. A very useful approximation, sure. You can do a lot of good engineering by treating things as zero when they are close enough. But at the fundamental level, nature does not do zeros. Nature does hums. The quietest room in the world is not quiet. The emptiest space in the cosmos is not empty. The most still atom is not still. And the most silent moment of your life, the deepest silence you have ever felt, was just the moment when you finally started hearing what was always there. I love that. I do not find it disturbing, I find it beautiful. Because it means you are never really alone with nothing. Even when the world goes quiet, your own body and your own brain are still humming, still working, still engaged in this magnificent, restless process of being alive and trying to make sense of a universe that never, even for a fraction of a second, sits still. If I were to leave you with one thought, it would be this. Next time you are somewhere very quiet, late at night maybe, and you think you hear something, a faint ringing, a whisper, a hum, you cannot quite place, Do not dismiss it. Do not assume it is your imagination. It might be, or it might be the actual physical sound of your own nervous system at work. The noise floor, the most sensitive instrument you will ever own. The sound of the molecules in your ear, jiggling at 37 degrees. The sound of your brain refusing to believe the world has gone silent. Because the brain is right, the world has not gone silent. The world never goes silent, and neither do you. Not while you have a temperature, a heartbeat, and a nervous system that refuses to stop asking questions about what it ought to be hearing next. So I will leave the question with you. If silence does not exist, if the universe has no off switch, if even absolute zero has a tremor, and every detector has a noise floor, and every brain fills in the gaps, then what exactly is it we are craving when we say we want peace and quiet? What is it we think we are looking for? And if we found it, if we truly found absolute silence, the total absence of all vibration, all fluctuation, all neural activity, would we even be there to notice? Think about that. And let me know what you come up with.